Oops. Okay. A little complicated here, but I think everything is working properly. All right. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahavidyan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome to you all, and welcome to all the students and others attending our Satsang online. And we're trying once again to live stream this these satsangs. We'll see how it goes. If the live stream messes up, it'll just stop, and we'll put the recording up later. But hopefully we've got most of the technical problems solved. A couple of notes here. One is I need to apologize in advance because there are lots of questions and there's no way we can cover all these questions. So I apologize in advance if I'm not able to get to your question. Also, last week I made a mistake in that I have a list of questions here, and I failed to look in my inbox where new questions were coming during the live stream. So I get questions all week long, and every question I receive goes in a separate mailbox. And then during the live stream, there are further questions which are coming, and I failed to even look at those questions in the prior class. So I'm still trying to figure out how to do this, so I will do my best, and I hope you will forgive me if I make some blunders, which I always do. I'm good at that. So let's begin with a couple of questions that actually came during last week's satsang. This question from Ashutosh, who lives in Bihar. He says, after reading Vedanta, I sometimes lose connection with normal worldly thinking, that everything, like the moon and sun, everything are but Maya. How can I remain in the world and receive its natural blessings and yet realize the truth of Brahman? And allow me to paraphrase Ashutosh's question. And I can relate to it because I remember early on as a student attending certain classes, and I would just walk out of that class with my mind blown, to use the language we used at that time. And in that condition, the reality of the world around me seems so much less real. But there's some truth to that. The world is not as real as it seems. But if we treat the world as being utterly unreal, doesn't the magic go away, the beauty of it? Imagine being with a loved one and thinking everything is unreal. That's a good example. You're with your loved ones, with your family, with your spouse, and everything is unreal. How does that work? Not too well. So then how can we reconcile this Vedantic, lofty Vedantic perspective, Brahma satyam, jagan mithya. Brahman is real. Brahman alone is real. The world is not. How do we reconcile that with being able to relate to the world in a meaningful human manner? And it's no big deal. I don't mean to make light of the question, but you already do this. You know the sun, and you know at sunset the sun is not moving down. You know that the earth is turning on its axis. You know this all very well. that mean you can't enjoy the sunset? No problem, right? You can enjoy the beauty of the colors, and you can even say, oh, look, the sun is going down. You can say that even though you know it's not true. Where's the conflict? Our minds are capable of doing both. Our minds are capable of being rooted in the truth of what is real and what is not real, and at the same time, our minds are capable of enjoying the wonders of the world presented to us by Ishvara. Not only I'll give you one more metaphor, not only the wonders presented by Ishvara, we'll have fun with this just for a moment, the wonders presented by Hollywood and Bollywood, because when you watch a movie, do you mistake the movie as being absolutely real? Never for a moment do you lose sight of the fact that it's just a movie. Yet, you sure enjoy them. So the two are not in conflict with each other. The perspective of the absolute unreality, let me change my words, the perspective of the unreality of the world from an absolute standpoint, that understanding and our ability to interact with this world, real, unreal, whatever it is, our ability to interact, to engage ourselves fully in the world, these two perspectives are not in conflict with each other. We can easily do both. There's no conflict. One more question here from, this is Shubham, who lives in Ohio. I think it's she. She says, I'm trying to do the observing thought meditation. Observing, I think she means sakshi bhava, the term we use in Vedanta, or perhaps vipassana, the term our Buddhist friends use. She uses this expression, observing thought meditation. That suggests that she is following a particular teacher who uses this particular expression. And she says, I think it's she, I hope I'm not making a mistake. When I try to observe thoughts, and when negative thoughts come up, I have to think that these negative thoughts are not real. I have to hold on to a positive thought. I'm kind of paraphrasing a little bit here. I have to hold on to a positive thought and I have to hold on to a thought to observe the thoughts, because otherwise I might accidentally think those negative thoughts, which are part of the mental chatter, and is not quite a sentence, but I think we all get what it means. Shubham is struggling with negative thoughts during the practice of sakshi bhava. But the fact that she says, when negative thoughts come up, I have to think they are not real. Do you know, I could be completely wrong, but I think Shubham might be following a teaching that is problematic. To say that your thoughts are not real is not helpful. It might be true from an absolute Vedantic standpoint, but your thoughts are as real as your body, as your family members, as your house, as everything else. And to imagine somehow that your thoughts are less real than everything else, not only is it not helpful, but our friends who are practicing psychologists and psychiatrists would actually put a label of mental illness if you fail to understand the reality of your own mind and thoughts. They use terms like derealization and other words to describe that condition. Your thoughts are as real as your body, as your friends, as your family. They're facts of your experience, and they should be treated the same as family, friends, and other facts of your experience. Among your family and friends, there are some you like very much. There are probably a few you don't like very much. That's normal, right? Similarly, when you are observing your thoughts in meditation, there'll be some that are very pleasant, and there'll be some that are not pleasant. Okay. We just accept it for what it is. Notice that if you're if you're in the presence of someone you don't like very much, do you try to convince yourself they're not real? That's an interesting approach. You can tell them, hey, you're not real. I'm being silly. Anyway, the people who you don't like are as real as the people that you do like. So there's no need to make this kind of distinction, no reason to do what psychologists call derealization. It is what it is. And the whole point of this meditation, which is better known as sakshi bhava in Sanskrit, and in the Pali language, it's called vipassana. It's judgment-free observation. Notice I added that adjective, judgment-free. If you're making judgments about it, you're not meditating, you're thinking. The whole purpose of that meditation is to observe without making judgments. That's the purpose. It's just a thought. It's not a good thought. It's not a bad thought. It's not pleasant or unpleasant. It's not from the past or present. It's just a thought. Non-judgmental observation. Not only non-judgmental, but along with that comes a second issue about how we tend to have an inner commentary, verbal commentary in our mind that goes on whenever we're experiencing something. Right now, you're all attending this class, watching this class, and inside your mind, you're making you have this commentary. Oh, that was very clever. Or more likely, oh, that was really dumb with regard to my comments. This is a kind of inner commentary we often have, and sometimes that inner commentary goes on during meditation. That's not meditation. If you are making inner comments about your thoughts, like, oh, that's a negative thought, I have to treat it as not being real. That's an example of that inner commentary. And that's not meditation. That's not vipassana. That's not sakshi bhava. She uses the expression observing thought meditation. I presume these all mean the same thing. So the purpose of this meditation, I should say the goal of this meditation, is to observe whatever you experience without judgment, without inner comment. By the way, if you're not familiar with this technique, in my course in meditation, there's at least one one session devoted to this sakshi bhava. It's important to know the technique and practice it properly, because bad jokes are coming today. I'm warning you in advance. If you have a good technique, meditation technique, and you practice it improperly, then instead of doing meditation, you'll be doing meditation. How's that? That's a bad joke. I'll take one more question here. This is a question from Gavin, who lives in Melbourne, Australia. It's just wonderful to have people all over participating in these satsangs. Gavin says, in one satsang, I made a point about approaching Vedanta from the point of view of self-inquiry instead of studying Vedanta. He said this point really hit home. I was doing the same thing. I was studying Vedanta in an academic manner. And you've heard me joke before, that is, if you're studying Vedanta, you're wasting your time. Because the subject matter is not Vedanta, the subject matter is your true self. That's why better to look upon it as a process of self-inquiry guided by these teachings. So, Gavin's question here is, what is that process of self-inquiry while we study Vedantic scriptures? For example, while studying Bhagavad Gita, how do I practice self-inquiry? And there's a problem here, is we're kind of like making two different things, study and self-inquiry. I'm saying that this isn't study, this is only self-inquiry. So if you're studying the Bhagavad Gita, you're wasting your time. It's only self-inquiry. And then how to make reading the Bhagavad Gita into a process of self-inquiry. And the way to do that is, it's easy to describe, but a little harder to put in practice. And that is, whatever you read, you have to interpret in terms of your own personal experience. To use other words, what does it mean to me? When Sri Krishna says, I am the cause of the entire universe, what does that mean to you? How is that significant in your own personal practice, on your own spiritual path? So to take every little bit of teaching you hear or read and say, how does that affect me? What is its consequence to my process of spiritual growth? How does that help me reduce the suffering and confusion and ignorance in my life? That's what it means to engage these teachings not as study, but as a process of self-inquiry. It's a shift of perspective, is really what it is. A fellow student of mine said he loves Sanskrit grammar, and very skillful in Sanskrit grammar. He's now Swami Tadatmananda, dear friend of mine. Many years ago, he said very cleverly, the trick is not to listen in the third person, but to listen in the first person. Well said by a grammar student. You get the point. Third person, he, she, or it. First person, me. So to hear the teachings in the first person. Okay, there are more questions here. Also, let me remind myself right now. We'll take some questions here now. Raise your hand who has a question. Over here. Either way. And give me just a moment, because I'm going to look in the inbox so that I don't forget to take some current questions. Okay. And then, very good. Okay, please.
Namaste, Swamiji. So I want to get a little more clarity about some technical terms, like turiya, which I understand as the, like, not state, but like describing pure consciousness.
Correct.
Also, I've heard the term thuriyatheetha. And one more term.
Thuriyatheetha, beyond the fourth. Exactly. So the fourth, by the way, let me just to clarify. So we talk about 3 states of mind. The state of waking state, 1. Dream state, 2. Deep sleep state, 3. 3 states of mind, and then there is a 4th, which is not a state of the mind, but rather the consciousness which makes all 3 states of mind known. And then you can find some obscure, non-mainstream texts that talk about thuriyatheetha, that which is beyond the 4th, and we'll address that in a moment. But finish your question, please.
Yes, just one more term. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it's mentioned the term spanda, which refers to the subtle vibrations of the consciousness. So can you elaborate about that?
Okay, so thuriyatheetha and spanda are two terms, neither of which have any role in Advaita Vedanta. So let me preface, I'll answer your question, but let me preface my answer with this observation. Advaita Vedanta is a methodology to help you discover your true nature. As I've said too many times, it's not just a bunch of information, it's a method, it's like a roadmap. Now, suppose you're using, that eclipse is coming tomorrow. Suppose you're using a roadmap and trying to find your way to see the eclipse, and you want to do this in, I think, comes in some part of upstate New York. So suppose you're heading for upstate New York, you're using a New York, and I know people don't use paper maps today, everyone uses GPS, but in a pretty much, by the way, I stopped driving cars about 10, 20 years ago, so for me, map means a piece of paper. Now here's the problem. If you're trying to navigate yourself up to upstate New York, and if I'm using a map of New Jersey, is that map of New Jersey going to be helpful or harmful? It certainly is not going to help me find my destination. This is the problem when we go outside the scope of Advaita Vedanta. Please be careful. I am not saying Advaita Vedanta is better than anything else. But one thing I know for sure is Advaita Vedanta works. If other things work or not, I'm not an expert. I can't, if you ask me, does these teachings of spanda and thuriyatheetha, do they work or not? I have no idea. I'm not an expert on that. But one thing I can tell you is that these teachings are off the map, so to speak, and not, if you are following these teachings as your main sadhana, as your main spiritual practice, you will probably not find it helpful to go way outside. So the term thuriyatheetha is actually not way outside. I think you can find the term in Yoga Vasishta and some other texts. Yoga Vasishta is not Advaita Vedanta, any text. And it also occurs in some obscure Upanishads. You can find all these references, and scholars love to go looking for all these references. Okay, I mean, thuriyatheetha means that which is beyond consciousness, and of course, according to Advaita Vedanta, consciousness is Brahman. How can there be anything beyond Brahman? So it's completely contrary to the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. I'm not saying it's wrong. Maybe there's another path that uses all this. I'm doubtful, of course, but anything is possible. Same goes for spanda. I think there's more like Kashmiri Shaivism has this doctrine of spanda and some other teachings. So consciousness undergoes some vibration. Again and again, we have said, following the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, consciousness is unchanging. Therefore, consciousness can't vibrate. There's no spanda. But I think the more general topic here is less about spanda and thuriyatheetha, but rather about the hazards of going outside. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to give any dogmatic assertion. You should never go outside the teachings of Advaita Vedanta. As a young student, I read everything and anything. So I know a little bit about thuriyatheetha and spanda. If I only narrowly understood Advaita Vedanta, I wouldn't even know what these terms mean. No, I read everything, even a lot of Christian mysticism, which I found really powerful. So anyway, that was all part of my early practice. But I don't study any of that anymore. There must be some reason for that. Think about it. It was helpful to me to some extent back then. It's no longer helpful. Just an observation. So I don't mean to discourage you, especially if you are early in your process of spiritual inquiry. I really feel strongly it's good. Expose yourself to as many things as possible. I think that exposure is helpful. But eventually, if you've come to see Advaita Vedanta as the main vehicle for your spiritual growth, then I think it'll be unhelpful to go outside. Does that answer? Okay. Next question, back here.
Swamiji,
Take the microphone, please.
Namaste, Swamiji. As far as consciousness, I get it. It's sakshi.
It's you.
It's me. It's self.
Yeah. It's not an idea. It's not a concept. Consciousness is present in your experience right now as you. All right, continue, please.
The truth of myself, or
Got
the
it.
essence of
Got it.
myself. So is it appropriate to associate, which I've heard a few times, would it be appropriate to associate qualities with consciousness, like purity, peace, or bliss, or happiness? Would that, I just want a little bit of clarification, because
Good.
I've heard that before.
Okay. Does consciousness have qualities? Cloth can have the quality of being orange or some other color. Cloth can have a quality of being made of cotton or wool or other materials. So these properties can change, and it's still cloth. The idea of a property is that aspect of a thing which is changeable. That's our definition of property. You're using kind of technical language. You use the word property. So in logic, a property is that which can change. This cloth can be white in color, but it still exists. So it can be a different color. The property of color can change, but it remains cloth. We've discussed, in fact, we just made mention just a few moments ago, that Vedanta leads us to understand that the consciousness, which is your essential nature, is unchanging. Properties, by definition, are changing. Now, you use words like peace and bliss, and you've all heard Atma is Satchidananda, and then Ananda gets translated as bliss, and immediately gets misinterpreted as experiential bliss, which comes and goes. So when we say Atma is Sat Chit Ananda, these three words are not properties. And let me explain why they're not properties. Properties is, like I said, this cloth can be a different color, but it still exists. Can Atma be asat and still exist? Asat means that which doesn't exist. So that's not possible. Can Atma be achit? Means jada, means insentient. Wait a minute. In your experience right now, you are present as a sentient being. So Atma cannot be achit, which means sat is not a property, chit is not a property. And this is, by the way, this discussion is a little pedantic, but it's a response to this word property. And finally, ananda, which is not experiential bliss, for the obvious reason that bliss comes and goes. You don't come and go. You are the observer of experiential bliss that comes and goes. So ananda cannot mean experiential bliss. Most commentators will paraphrase ananda as ananta, limitless, full, complete, vast. Can Atma be ananta? double negative, so we'll make it not double negative. Can Atma be limited? If Atma is limited, it's not Atma. So I'm making the point then that Ananda or Ananta is also not a property. These three words reveal the essential nature of Atma. They're not properties. So Atma has no, you already know Atma has no gunas. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas belong to your mind and not to Atma. But not only is Atma free from the three gunas, Atma is free from any other quality. Sat, Chit, Ananda are not qualities or properties. These are three words that describe the essence of consciousness. Okay, any follow-on?
No.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's take a couple more questions here. I'm going to try to take some questions now that are coming during our live stream. Okay, seems to be working. Hope so. Okay, so let's take a question here. This is a question from Om Prakash, who lives in Irving, Texas. Om Prakash asks, I'm a little confused with the knownness of things as consciousness versus what we know as objects. Aren't they the same thing? Object is known with the help of consciousness. I got that part. But without an object, there is no knownness. Can you please clarify this? And yeah, my use of the word knownness is a little unconventional. And I think that is what's causing a problem. And the reason I use that word knownness is to give us another perspective. The way these teachings of Vedanta work is you come at the same question or issue from this side, from this side, from this side, from this side, from as many sides as possible, hoping that one of those approaches will click for you. I'm being honest. This is what a teacher does. A teacher will use, a skillful teacher will say, will use as many different approaches to an issue as possible, hoping that something will click. And what I would suggest for Om Prakash is if knownness doesn't click for you, it's okay. It's absolutely okay. That's not a very satisfying answer, so what I would suggest to really understand knownness, please, and I'm presuming that you listened to last week's, I'm addressing Om Prakash, and I've gotten emails from him before. I'm suggesting, Om, that you re-watch last week's Upadesha Sahasri class, and then watch today's Upadesha Sahasri class, and I think that the nature of knownness will become clear. So instead of going into all the technical details here, but I think my observation that I just shared with you is significant, that we use different language and different approaches very deliberately, trying to find some way to lead you. We used a metaphor of a map before. What's interesting about maps is if your destination is in the middle of the map, how many ways are there to get there? Routes. There are so many routes to get to that same place. And I think the prakriyas, the teaching methodologies we use in Advaita Vedanta represent those many routes. Don't mistake me. I'm not saying that you can go by the path of bhakti, by the path of karma yoga. That's not what we're saying. We're talking about teaching methodologies, not sadhana. The sadhana is Advaita Vedanta. And the roots are the different methodologies used by Advaita Vedanta. Let's see. There's a question from Kartik. Kartik asks, can we have direct experience of anything as every sense perception filters the actual reality through our minds? That is, Can you see me sitting here without your eyes? Huh? The only way you have to see me is your eyes. The only way you have to hear me is your ears. If you're short-sighted, you might think Swami Tadatmananda is very fuzzy today. If you are hard of hearing, you might think Swami Tadatmananda is speaking so softly today. So, to address Kartik's question, can we perceive material reality exactly as it is without any error whatsoever? Of course not. This is a limitation of our senses and minds. Just like our senses are subject to making all kinds of errors, our minds are equally capable of making all kinds of errors. The only thing, he says, direct experience. The only thing you have direct experience of is the contents of your mind. So if I am present in your mind as a fuzzy Swami sitting on a fuzzy chair because you forgot to wear your glasses, you can only have direct experience of that fuzzy Swami on the fuzzy chair. One more question here. And again, there are really a lot of questions. Let's try this one. This is from Ravi, who lives in Colorado. Ravi asks, Advaita says that pure consciousness is unborn, not subject to birth and death. In that case, how can consciousness be reborn? We talk about reincarnation. How can consciousness be reborn? Obviously, if it's not born, it can't be reborn, right? Only that which is born is subject to rebirth. Consciousness doesn't get born, your body does. And your body is not just a thing, your body is invested with life force, with intelligence, with the mind. In Advaita Vedanta, we use the term sukshma sharira to describe all these features of the, all these features which enliven a body, and it is that sukshma sharira that is said to travel. I've described this quite extensively in many other classes, so I would suggest you read my, I think there's one video, Who Reincarnates? You'll find that very succinctly answers Ravi's question. Let me just give a brief metaphor, not. So there are too many questions here. So Ravi, I would suggest you look at that. Take one more question that's come here. Okay. Here. This is a question from Jim, who lives in Worcester, Massachusetts. How would they pronounce it? Worcester. Worcester, Massachusetts. Okay. And Jim asks, since I am not even the witness observer, it is just one more stepping stone, like I am not the body, and etc. All of these teachings about heaven and hell, bondage and moksha, and all the teachings of Advaita Vedanta can be seen as mere relative truths. So far, I would actually agree with Jim. All of the teachings of Vedanta are words. Words are not truth. You are the truth. Words are not the truth. And let's finish Jim's question. So, is it correct to say that a mind that knows this is absolutely true? Is it correct then to say that a mind that knows this is absolutely true A mind that knows this is absolutely true. What is absolutely true? That Vedanta is relative. A mind that knows that Vedanta is absolutely true is enlightened. Not necessarily. Vedanta is a philosophy like any other philosophy. That understanding certainly doesn't make you enlightened. Leaves only infinite, impersonal, boundaryless, imageless consciousness. Wow! What language. Okay, let's make this, let's bring this down to earth a little bit. Vedanta is a bunch of words, a bunch of teachings, a bunch of methodologies which are meant to lead you to discover the true nature of the consciousness present in your experience right now. And you might ask, how can relative, here, let me rephrase perhaps Jim's question. How can teachings that are relatively true lead to an absolute truth? Okay? I'm rephrasing this question. How can teachings that are relatively true lead to an absolute truth? Well, the first part, when we say that the teachings of Vedanta are relative, they're words, but they have a conclusion. In other words, it's not just words after words after words after words, but all of these words have a conclusion. And what is that conclusion? Tat Tvam Asi. Turns out that Tat Tvam Asi, properly understood, is not a relative teaching. It's a teaching of the ultimate truth. Everything that leads to Tat Tvam Asi is relative. Relative in the sense that you can actually negate it. You can argue. All the teachings leading up to, he uses the expression stepping stone. We've used this metaphor many, many times. Stepping stone means that you give up the prior stepping stone before moving on to the next one. And that is an accurate way of describing the teachings of Vedanta. The teachings of Vedanta, which says first of all, you are not your body, is the first stepping stone. But then, you are not, you are the one inside your body, is the first stepping stone. And then the second stepping stone, no, you're not. And then the third stepping stone, that's also not true. Fourth stepping stone, that's also not true. The technical term for this technique is called adhyaropa apavada, and that means that you make a tentative statement, a hypothesis, and then go beyond it. You make another hypothesis, go beyond that. Make another hypothesis and go beyond that. In that sense, the teachings of Vedanta are, as Jim says, they're relative. But when we take all of these stones, stepping stones, and leave every one behind, then we end up on the stone that is Tat Tvam Asi. Do we leave that stone behind? Is there a next stone? So this is the technique of Advaita Vedanta. It's not that the whole of it is relative, but it's a methodology meant to lead you up to that conclusive point, the conclusive point indicated in Tat Tvam Asi. But then even Tat Tvam Asi are words, concepts, ideas, and of course Jim and all of you already know that the goal is not to hold on to these words, but to use these words properly to discover your true nature. Okay, let me take one more question here. Where am I going now? Back to Satsang questions here. This next question from Guillermo. Guillermo, who lives in Glasgow in UK. Nice. And the question is, are you, as a liberated being, always aware of Brahman? Are you always aware of being pure awareness? Now, we have to understand, are you always aware of? So the word aware is problematic here. I think the idea is more attention. Where is your attention? Is your attention focused on being Brahman? If my attention right now is focused on being Brahman, how can I respond to your question? So, and Satsang some time ago, we said that when you're enlightened, it's not that you constantly think, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. That's silly, right? It's unnecessary. If you know that your name is so-and-so, do you have to keep, if your name is Guillermo, do you have to wake up in the morning and say, I am Guillermo, I am Guillermo, I am Guillermo? It's not necessary. What you already know completely, important adjective, adverb, what you already know completely, you don't have to remind yourself. And that's the idea here, that as an enlightened person, it's not necessary to remind yourself. So it's always present. That knowledge is always present. It may not be foremost in your mind all the time. It need not be foremost in your mind all the time. That's the idea. Shall we take another question here? Question here.
Namaste, Swamiji. Question is about mantra japa and the technique or methodology related to reflecting on the meaning during the japa. I've had moments where I've tried to really hold on to the words in my mind, like narrowly focus onto them, and other times, because it's not natural to me to think, obviously, in the Sanskrit, so then I'm like also translating them in my mind almost as I'm saying them, and other times where I'm visualizing me, let's say, Om Nama, right? Like bowing down.
Good.
What can you just elaborate on, like, what exactly you mean by reflecting on the meaning? Is this kind of the essence, or something else?
Good. That's a good question, and it relates to the fact that the way I've taught mantra japa is not as a technique, but as a whole category of techniques. There's so many ways to use a mantra. One of the ways you've described as focusing on the meaning. So what does it mean to focus on a mantra? The meaning of a mantra, if the meaning of the mantra is Om Namo Narayanaya. And when I say to focus on the meaning, it means not on the sound. That's a very common technique. Om Namo Narayanaya. The sound is beautiful, it's compelling. So you can make the sound of the mantra your focal point, or you can have the image of Lord Narayana, Vishnu in your mind is another way of using. But here you've asked about the meaning of the mantra. And even the meaning of the mantra has different aspects. So one meaning is Narayana. Who is Narayana? Who is that aspect of God? And what is my relationship to that aspect of Ishvara? For example, to see myself, maybe not use the word see. In meditation, in mantra japa, to feel that I am, in many ways, my approach to meditation, as you know, is not one way of doing it, but many ways of doing it, depending on your individual inclination. So how can we take the meaning of that mantra, Om Namo Narayanaya? One might be, Narayana is the essence of all, the one, the uncaused cause, the one because of which we all exist, and I am utterly non-separate from that Narayana. Not to conceptually know I am non-separate from that Narayana, but to feel, here I am, sitting in meditation, reciting this mantra, and at this time I am non-separate from Narayana. Non-separate, or I am a part of Narayana, or I am a creation of Narayana. So here we have other things. The other aspect you yourself hinted at just a moment ago, you probably have used this. Namaha, salutations. Nam, as in Sanskrit, nam is the root meaning to bow or bend. So when you say Namo Narayanaya, bowing, that sense of humility we can feel when we are in the presence of greatness, of magnificence, of blessedness. You might have felt that when you go into a special temple, a really holy place, where you feel kind of awed. And in that feeling of being awed, you feel humbled by that awe. And the word namaha can bring that feeling of awe and humbledness in the presence of the divinity, can bring it in. So these would be some examples. There are other ways as well. But am I addressing your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
My main thing is that sometimes during the meditation, I'd find myself getting lost in thought and trying to reflect on the meaning just with thought, and then something doesn't feel right about that, right? So is it natural to start with the thought and try to follow and flow into the feeling of it? The connection, like humility you described, not just I am humble, but feeling it, right? Heart.
That thought is an inevitable hazard in any process of meditation. And it's not helpful to say you shouldn't think during meditation, because now you're creating a setup for tension. Oh, I'm thinking. Oh, I'm doing it wrong. Oh, how should I do it right? Oh, I'm not able to do it right. Oh, these thoughts are coming. Not helpful. If some kind of thinking is helpful in getting you more deeply established in the meditation, then in some limited sense, thinking might be helpful. In general, most kinds of thinking, though, is a nuisance. Okay, there's another question right here.
Namaste, Swamiji. Following up on some of the other comments you made earlier today. So I'm a recent, student of Vedanta, and have immensely benefited it, but I've been following another practice from another guru, which is form of a Kriya Yoga. And if you're doing that, if you're finding it helpful, does that actually preclude you from following the Vedanta?
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
I won't ask you the teacher. Is it Soham?
No, it's Sadhguru.
Okay, Sadhguru's teachings. Is following, the question is, can you make use of meditation practices taught by other gurus? So Sadhguru has his techniques. Sri Ravi Shankar has his techniques. Every teacher has their techniques. And this is, you've heard me teach meditation before, and I've said again and again, and I'll say to you, if it works for you, go for it. There's no harm. A technique is meant to create a condition of mind which is beneficial to your spiritual practice. So if any technique is creating a benefit to you, continue. If a technique is not beneficial, and I'll give you the counterexample. Many people take up mantra japa. In fact, some people are initiated with a particular technique by some great guru, and they use that technique religiously for years and years and years, even after the technique has ceased to be beneficial at all. This happens a lot. People are afraid to let go of a technique because I was formally initiated by this great guru, and therefore I have to hold on to this technique in spite of the fact that it no longer works. This is counterproductive. So if A technique may work for you and at a later point may not work for you. If any technique ceases to be beneficial to you, it's time to look for a technique that is more beneficial to you. Any follow-up there?
No, thank you.
Good. By the way, that's a comment with regard to the techniques taught by other teachers, not necessarily what they teach. So people teach all kinds of different things. Again, but you can use the same measure. Are these teachings helpful or unhelpful? Would be a good place to evaluate. Okay, let's take a couple more questions here. And where am I? Let's back to. I'm making my life more complicated. Okay, let's see here. Oh, sorry. Now what am I doing? Anyway, like I said, I'm still figuring this stuff out and at least occasionally making a mess of things because all of these gadgets are fairly... Okay, let's get back on track here. Okay, I'm off in some other zone. I apologize. Okay, let's get on track here. Okay, here we go. A couple more questions here. This question from Ganesh, who lives in San Francisco. Ganesh asks, when I silently meditate on Om arising, sustaining, and dissolving within Atma. This is a technique many of you have practiced here. That Om, when you're chanting Om, 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 that Om arises from silence, that Om is sustained but over the silence, and that Om resolves into silence. That silence is a metaphor for consciousness. So Om arises in consciousness, the unchanging consciousness, that is your true nature. Om is sustained in that unchanging consciousness, and eventually that Om resolves into that unchanging consciousness. So it says, is my ahankara the one witnessing and helping to realize this? This actually comes to your question about thinking during meditation. So in this technique, Om, Om, Om. And typically in teaching this technique, I will talk at portions of the technique and describe how when you begin chanting Om, it's preceded by silence. As you're chanting Om, there's nothing else happening in your mind. So we could say that Om occurs in the silence of the mind. There's only Om present in the mind. And at the end, Om, it returns to silence. So I use words to help get meditators into the groove, so to speak. Now the question is, when you are at home practicing this technique, should you have this? So Ganesh talks about this kind of analysis. Is it ahankara witnessing and helping realize? Helping realize suggests that Ganesh is thinking about Om, rising from silence, sustained in silence, returning to silence, or consciousness. So the question is, are you in that meditation, are you supposed to think about it, that Om, Om, and then you say, oh, it's arising from silence, Om, Om, oh, it's sustained in silence, Om, Om, oh, it's returning to silence. That's not wrong, but it's not meditation. We would call that contemplation, nididhyasana. So nididhyasana is a process of bringing your understanding to bear on a particular experience, like the experience of meditation. So, which is a valuable technique, but it's not meditation. So if your goal is to do Vedantic contemplation, what Ganesha is describing, notice, I can see how Om is preceded by pure, unchanging consciousness. To have that train of thought in your mind is Vedantic contemplation. And if that's what you want to do, then it's a helpful technique. As long as it's meaningful. If you're just making up silly things, that won't be helpful. But it's not meditation. What is meditation is Om, without the thoughts. Om. And one thing that is important to this particular kind of meditation is to increase the gap between Oms. That's an important part of this meditation. You begin Om, Om, Om. The idea is that your full attention is on Om and nothing else. That's the idea of the meditation. Then you start putting gaps in between Oms. Om, Om, Om. And what's happening in those gaps? Nothing. That's meditation. To be with the Om during the Om, and to be with the silence during the silence, the gap between mantras. And then you can make the gap a little longer. Om. Om. At some point the gap becomes too wide and you start thinking in that gap. Okay, then it's too wide. Then you shorten the gap again. And even if you have to go back to Om, 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 it's okay. So the idea of that meditation, as meditation, that the goal is to have your attention 100% focused on Om during the Om, and have your attention 100% focused on silence during the silence. That's meditation. On the other hand, to reflect. Om arises from consciousness. Om is sustained in consciousness. Om resolves into consciousness. That's a wonderful form of Vedantic contemplation, nididhyasana. It might be very helpful for you. It's not an introductory technique, but if you're ready for that technique, it might be very helpful, or it might not. Depends on you as an individual. Okay, and let's see if we take one more question, if I can push the right buttons for change. And go, yeah, why is that? I'm not, maybe, I don't know, what am I? Sorry for messing around here, but I can't make out some of these mailboxes. Let's take just one more question from our local students here. Any further question? In back here, please.
Swamiji, you said essential nature of myself is pure consciousness, right? And it doesn't involve any transaction, right? But also I'm a human being and my very existence depends on transacting.
Whose existence? Not consciousness.
As a human being.
No, so that's not you.
Okay.
So when you use the pronoun I, don't move it around. So if you're talking about consciousness, I'm sorry, just be careful with your language. I want to hear the rest of your question, but you're talking about two very different things right now. Consciousness doesn't depend on your body and mind for its existence. So go on, please.
So the second I am talking about is, this body and mind.
Okay,
perhaps,
which depends on zillions of things, correct. Mm-hmm.
So how do I reconcile this conflict?
What is a conflict?
The transactionless pure consciousness versus the
Where,
body and mind.
yeah, where is the conflict?
The transacting.
Why? Conflict means things that don't fit together. I don't hear anything that doesn't fit together. Consciousness has no needs. Your body has plenty of needs. Where is the conflict?
Isn't that a contradiction?
Why is that a contradiction?
Because one needs and one doesn't need.
One needs, one doesn't need. There are two people. One is hungry and one is thirsty. Where's the conflict? There's no conflict. Atma doesn't need anything. Your body and mind needs thousands of things. No conflict. Conflict only comes when, as I heard at the beginning of your question, when we don't create a good barrier between the two, boundary between the two. And that is, Atma is perfectly fine even when the needs of the body and mind are not being met. That's what we want to discover in these teachings of Advaita Vedanta, that Atma, your true nature as unchanging consciousness, is not affected by the condition of your body and mind. So if the needs of the body and mind are met, fine. If the needs of body and mind are not met, you say or BTK, that's also okay, that's also fine. It doesn't make any difference to Atma. It makes a tremendous difference to your body. If you're hungry, you need food. If you're thirsty, your body, not you need food, notice the language. If there is we'll end with this observation, and I did this in the class before, and I like this language. Try this. This may or may not work for you, but I think it's helpful. If hunger is present in your experience, how does it affect consciousness by which that experience is known? Not at all. Consciousness is the unchanging revealer of the presence of hunger, which is a vritti, a mental event that occurs in your mind. It occurs in the mind without affecting consciousness whatsoever. On the other hand, the body is affected by hunger. It needs some food. So you should give the body some food. Who eats food? Not Atma. Your body needs food, so you give it some food. Your body needs water, rest, so many things. You give it what it needs. But with this proper discernment between body and mind on one side and between your true nature as pure consciousness on the other. Does that address? Yeah. Okay. All right, this is a good place to conclude for today. I'm looking forward, I'm sorry we couldn't cover all the questions, but these questions are great. So please continue sending me your questions by email. We'll do the best possible to take them also. So nice also to have questions from our local students. We'll conclude with a prayer. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschad Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat. See you next time. Om.